Hey everybody, Jeff Tidwell here with another one of my tweet videos for you today. It is Saturday, February 1st, 2020, and we are going back into the past, heading all the way back to April 2019 to look at some of my tweets. As always, you can find me on Twitter at RealJeffTidwell. I'm also on Gab, Minds, Telegram, Parler, and Instagram. If you're not watching this video on YouTube, you're watching it on BitChute. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy the content, please do hit like and subscribe. If you'd like to get notifications, well, hit the little bell below. If you don't enjoy the content, well, you know what to do. Tap the downvote button. It is very helpful with the algorithm. And of course, if you find my cadence to be a little bit on the slow side during these longer tweet videos, you can hit the 2x speed button and get all of the information in half of the time. Time is the currency, of course, and that is double bang for your buck. And if you're watching this tweet video, you are receiving a bit of a grab bag, a mystery bag of information. The title of the video is called Tweet. Doesn't really give you much context for what's going on outside of Twitter. So if you enjoy it but find this warts and all presentation, full context television, to be a bit long-winded in general, check out some of my shorter videos, my segments that have specific titles covering specific topics, and you may have a better time. And I welcome you in, and I hope you enjoy. So without further ado, we're going to get into some tweets, but before we do that, I would like to make a shout out to the band. Well, we have a couple of people on Twitter, some of which are my friends and others that are just public figures and journalists and so forth. And I wanted to make a note here and talk a little bit about this just for a moment, because one of the people banned recently by Twitter, I'm not sure if it's a permanent suspension or temporary. We don't actually know why, but let's get into that now. My friend Fred. Shout out to Fred. Shout out to the band. He's at Fred Revived on Twitter, and he was recently censored or banned from the platform for some reason. We don't know quite why, but I've spoken highly of Fred in the past, and I'd like to share who Fred is to me. My good friend. This is sort of in the voice of the nursing home De Niro from The Irishman, now on Netflix. So if you wanted only the best selfies, great philosophical content, and just enough solipsism to get the job done right, Fred was your guy. Back in the 2020s, the world was a different place. It was guys like Fred that held it all together. I miss Fred. I do. I'm not sure why Twitter chose to remove him from the platform. They use their curation rights as a publisher for some reason. Perhaps he was brigaded or reported on. We will have more information on that in the future. But also, it seems that Katie Hopkins, a British media pundit, was also removed. She has about 1 million followers and calls herself Milo's mom. Well, she was removed for what some people are calling hate speech. And if you've watched my channel, you know that hate speech is not a thing. Definitely check out that video on my channel. Hate speech is not a thing. That's available now. And we talk a little bit more about that idea. But hopefully Katie's content is restored. Apparently she was defending herself from somebody else when she was accused of hate speech or hateful conduct under the Twitter TOS, Terms of Service. So there will be more information on that in the future as well. And of course, Zero Hedge. Now, I need more information on what Zero Hedge actually did. Apparently they shared some information that was publicly available regarding a Chinese scientist, and they were permanently, there's no question, they were permanently removed from Twitter. So we will find out more in the future about that. But I don't want to ascribe motive or intention. I don't want to mind read at all. But I will say this. There is an election coming, and Zero Hedge and KT Hopkins, who was banned on the eve of Brexit, she's a right-leaning source, and Zero Hedge is right-leaning, and Fred is right-leaning. Now that's all just extra information. It might have no relevance whatsoever, but I figured I would let you know. So now, without further ado, let's get into some tweets. So here is a thought experiment for you to ponder and leave me a comment below with your thoughts. Thought experiment. Say I get jumped often. Oh no. Oh dear. Now, consider the following statements. I was jumped by 3 men. I was jumped by 3 white men. I was jumped by 3 black men. I was jumped by 3 Hispanic men. And I was jumped by 3 Asian men. Now, which statement among those 5 is the least racist? Leave me a comment below with your thoughts on that. I look forward to hearing from you. And I'll add this, that race is a filter, and we will move on from there. Thank you for participating. Okay, so here's another tweet that I will analyze, break down, and do what we usually do here on this channel with Jeff Tidwell. Deplatforming, depersoning, defaming, demonetizing, debanking, debasing, deplorable. Divestment, division, discrimination, disposal, disgusting. So, in this modern public square that we call the internet, the World Wide Web, depending on your age, you might have a different descriptor for whatever this big, wide web of information may be, but we call it the interweb, the internet, however it might be. And in this world, we do have people, we have power, we have bias, and we have subjectivity. Subjectivity, like I said earlier, that hate speech is not a thing. And the reason why hate speech is not a thing, is because the term is largely subjective. It's decided on arbitrarily by whoever is choosing to use that term. Now, we could certainly look in the dictionary and find an exact definition for hate speech, but then somebody will use that interpretation, or whatever interpretation they'd like, ascribe it to other people or to things they don't like for whatever reason, and say, well, this person should be deplatformed, depersoned, debanked, demonetized. There may be a brigade that comes out and mass reports somebody. Maybe that's what happened to Fred. My good friend Fred revived on Twitter. Who knows? But people get removed because in the TOS for these sites, they say, no hateful conduct. And the thing is that, as I said, race is a filter. That's one of many, many filters out there that people use when they're viewing certain content, certain words, certain statements. They put it through a filter and they say, well, this is why. This is why you're saying this. I've mind read your intention. I'm projecting it onto you. And this is why, this is what you're saying. This is what you're saying. I can't get into your head because mind reading is impossible. But this is what you're saying. That's called projection. And I certainly have a number of videos, such as projecting about projecting on my channel. Check it out. But frankly, we are seeing it go beyond just the publisher platform debate. Is Twitter and are Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, are they just platforms? Are they publishers? Or are they both? And do they use their, are they free from liability with the U.S. government? Are there certain protections they have? Are they subsidized? Yes, they are. and yet they don't have to abide by our Constitution and the First Amendment. Now, most people will come to me with the XKCD interpretation of the First Amendment and say, well, we're showing you the door. We have every right to use our household privileges and apply them to the entire modern public square. If you have wrong think over here, we want you out. You want to stay on this side. This echo chamber over here is the right think, and anybody outside of this narrow window, Overton window of acceptable dialogue is extreme. It's totally extreme, they'll say. And of course, then I will look at it, or somebody else will look at it. 3, 4, or 1 million people will look at the same statement and say, I don't see it. What are you seeing here? Oh, you've arbitrarily decided that this is something hateful or this is offensive. Well, it's not your right not to be offended. I do apologize for all those who have been offended by my words and my content over the years, but it's not your right not to be offended. It's just, well, it's closer to a privilege. And people get defamed, you know. People get debased through this process. People are called deplorable just for their association. They have guilt by association. Now, in this country, we have something called freedom of association, and it is covered under, we have freedom of assembly. We can get together and do things. That's why protests, you can always protest. You can always let your dissenting voice be heard. And it's a beautiful part of why our democracy works so well. Our democratic republic works so well. But we are seeing so much division, discrimination, and disposal. I talk about the phases of censorship. The final phase, of course, is active censorship. That is when you are silenced, and the prophets and disciples of the modern religion of censorship, well, they achieve a form of salvation when they silence the morally wrong, the morally incorrect statements based on their arbitrary definition. So we do have to have a discussion about this because we have an election coming up in the United States. We have a lot of information, misinformation, disinformation going around. Some people would call a little bit of this fake news. Check out my video, Fake News, Post-Truth Shopping Tips on BitChute and YouTube. I talk a little bit more about how the media confuses and conflates and, frankly, lies. They use lies by omission, lies by structure. They bury the lead. They use weasel words, like in my tweet, Fake News. Check that out on Twitter. And I talk a little bit about, I give a great example using an artful conceptual framing of how the media tends to lie or use post-truth to make, people think or persuade them in this direction or that. But of course, when you're deplatforming people, you are removing a voice, you are removing a perspective, and sometimes, there may be a good reason to do it. There may be something called a credible threat, direct harm, or, someone calling fire in a crowded theater. I don't believe in doxing or defamation. I don't like when people slander or libel. And no one likes unconsented pornography. There's a lot of different things that, free speech, even as a free speech absolutist might say, there are places where you go, well, maybe we can be a little bit more critical and careful. But people are being banned and it's not consistent. Sometimes someone's banned for one thing and then another source is doing the same thing with twice as many followers and no one's talking about it. It's not consistent. It's not fair. Fairness, of course, being, again, subjective, relative, and so forth. And, these are private companies that can do what they want. And that's kind of an issue because they do represent the modern public square of the internet. They are massive post-governmental entities with massive influence and power. They choose who speaks and who doesn't. And frankly, we have to be more and more critical of how much power they have and why they're doing what they're doing. The fact that we don't know why my friend Fred was banned. I don't even know much about why Katie Hopkins was banned. But I assure you that it should be temporary. If a person with 1 million followers is permanently banned, well, what does that say? Like, what did that person say? Look at what happened to James Woods too. Now I know I'm focusing on people from the right, and we need to understand something. Everybody needs to get this right away. Doesn't matter if they're focusing on the right or if they're focusing on the left, because everybody that goes against the primary narrative or goes against what the powers that be, now we're getting into conspiracy analysis here, the establishment. Now you've been radicalized into talking about the establishment. I think Bernie Sanders supporters will know what I'm talking about, as well as Donald Trump supporters, and many others that have experienced some animosity from the elites, the establishment figures that suppress and pass around talking points memos and say them and repeat them. And repetition is a big part of persuasion, but a lot of people aren't persuaded after they see just how this works. If you've seen the Sinclair Broadcasting PSA, you know that messaging can be rather universal across an entire corporation and anybody that's employed or part-time, contracting, and so forth from there. So there's a lot of mud in the water when it comes to the voices of people in the intelligence world, the intellectual world. I shouldn't say the intelligence community. Obviously, there are some issues with the CIA, the FBI, the NSA. Obviously, there are some people, anybody that has an anti-war sentiment knows the CIA is often used to create, an environment of propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation in different countries that they may be looking to, the United States and their allies, may be looking to make some impact in for one reason, geopolitical reason or another. But that's tangential. We'll come back to the disgusting, deplatforming, depersoning, defaming. So we do have defamation going on. People are slandered, frankly. And depending on who's saying it, it'll either be censored or perhaps even promoted by the algorithm. And I don't think the advertisers have much of a say, but when people are deplatformed, demonetized, they will say, well, it wasn't the algorithm that demonetized you or a specific individual person at the company, say Google, if in the case of YouTube, but it was the advertisers. The advertisers said they can't do it, even though that their products are sold to your audience quite a bit, and they were doing really well. The advertisers don't want to be associated with this. Well, you're creating a world of division. You have people on the right, for example, the false dichotomy of right and left in politics, but you have people on the right that won't buy anything from the companies on the left, and you have people on the left that won't buy anything from the companies on the right. So you're sowing division through these actions. You're creating pariahs. I do have a video out, the making and unmaking of pariahs. Check that out on my channel for more on that. But frankly, I am closer to a free speech absolutist. I am agnostic, if not atheistic, on the modern religion that is censorship. And I feel that I want more information because as a pro-information person, I say more information is better. And I do try to promote that. And while we're at that, read WikiLeaks. Read WikiLeaks if you want more information on what's going on inside your government and others, as well as some other corporations and larger entities that they happen to have information on. But certainly the CIA. Check out their Vault 7 release for more on how the CIA can manipulate data to make you and I, the public, believe whatever it wants us to. It's very important. So enough about that. Moving on. I continued on here. I'll just say this one more time so you understand. Deplatforming, depersoning, defaming, demonetizing, debanking, debasing. It's rather dehumanizing. It removes those humans from the situation and creates a negative cloud around them. The people that have not done the epistemological journey required may just, they may just cast them aside and say they're pariahs. We don't need them. I don't need any guilt by association by talking to them. I don't need anybody to say that I am, promoting them just because I say they should have the freedom of speech. Noam Chomsky has, his perspective on that. There are two things you can have. You can either have free speech or you don't have free speech. Speech is either free or it isn't. Okay. Goebbels, he says, Goebbels allowed free speech for the people he liked. So if you want to be more pro-free speech than Goebbels, you don't want to be running around censoring people. It's deplorable. The division, divestment, people do stop investing in companies and move their business around based on politics, based on largely partisan, binary red-blue politics. And it's destructive. It's discouraging. It is discriminating. It is discrimination. It's disassociating, disaffecting, disposal. And frankly, I try to keep it relatively neutral in these videos, but I do have my bias, my preferences, and the things that I want to say, and I personally find it rather disgusting. So, but it is what it is. Last tweet video I talked about this. Social justice is a modern religion, and should we teach religion in school? It's a great question. Onward and upward. Some good stuff here. I had posted about my video, Politics is a Post-Truth Realm. If you haven't come around to politics being a post-truth realm, certainly check out that video on BitChute and YouTube. Back in April 2019, I had started making these tweet videos, and I rather enjoy it. I do thank you for watching. We do have a bit of a warts and all presentation here, so you'll catch me coughing, and there are no edits when I can avoid them. Coughing and saying the wrong word, and sometimes a little bit long-winded, but again, the content is also available in smaller segment form. Something to look for. And we have some exclusive segments on Twitter as well. I talk about identity politics. I talk about that a lot on this channel. I have plenty of videos available on that. So don't want to hit the same topics again and again and again, as important or unimportant as they may be. So here's a named tweet. It's called Dumb Idea. I'm going to pull that up here. Dumb idea. It's not the people versus the state. It's not the rich versus the poor. It's not a race war. It's not a battle of the sexes. It's not about talent, privilege, merit, character, or moral virtue. It's not genetics. It's about getting smart, no matter how stupid you are. So I do believe that we naturally fall into this binary world. There are oftentimes, well, it comes down to those micro decisions, that micro simulation, that binary A B. Everything has a bit of an A B. You may have more options out there than two. There may be hundreds of options. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the choice you make, the choice we make as human beings, or another choice. So really, it's two options at the end. What you picked and everything else. But people talk about it being the people versus the state, and it is difficult. It's a difficult little situation when you have, I say that, institutions are a modern religion. That includes state, media, and academia. And I advise to be agnostic, to be very critical and to take a look at the bigger mosaic, the bigger picture, and try to find the truth that lies in between all of the hyperbole, the post-truth, and the lies that are often used for the greater good. The greater good being, of course, we can't have all of the state secrets exposed. People have to, there is a reality, there's hyper reality, what's really happening, and then there's the optical post-truth reality that the media assists the state and academia to pull the wool over the eyes of the people. Now, sometimes it's for good, and sometimes it's for bad, and all the time, good and bad in this case are subjective. And depending on the context you're looking at these situations in, they may change in terms of their validity and why, if it's moral or immoral. Because depending on how far you pull back on the mosaic, it could be more or less immoral or moral. But I think the people versus the state, we have to hold our government accountable. That's why I talk about WikiLeaks. I prefer to have transparency. I prefer there to be more of a meritocracy and for people to understand what they're getting into, what they're voting for. So if you read, for example, the DNC emails, Podesta emails, DNC leaks, all these things, you get a better view into the Democrat Party, and you can make some decisions, understanding, of course, that the Republican Party does probably a lot of the same things, but they're not exactly the same, and we really can't tell. We don't have the same window into their operations that WikiLeaks provided in 2016. So I do hope for more WikiLeaks in 2020 as we approach the 2020 U.S. presidential election. But in general, we should try to find ways to hold our government more accountable and not just vote red no matter who or blue no matter who. We should make sure that we're being more critical. Then I say it's not the rich versus the poor. And it isn't, because the rich employ the poor. I have a hashtag BET, B-E-T. Billionaires employ thousandaires. And that's the truth. Sure, there is a bit of wealth inequality, but what is the nature of that inequality? How much liquidity do those billionaires and millionaires have? And what resources are they providing through the services they have, the companies they own, their assets? Is it all just overseas in money markets? And is it all being held in the Cayman Islands? Or is it actually working here in the United States and abroad to create jobs, to create wealth in workers? Obviously we don't have a purely socialist system, and socialism, of course, is a persuasion word. You can use that word however you'd like to persuade in whatever direction you'd like. But we don't have pure socialism here. We have some elements of it, lobbyists, government contractors. We do have a little bit of it. But we don't have the full-on, the people owning the means of production, the government owning the means of production type of socialism. And so we tend to cast this frame. Rich versus poor. The rich people, they're holding the poor people down. And frankly, that's not entirely true or true at all. Because if you think about it, just for one point here, just Amazon, because Amazon is often under the hot microscope, the hot magnifying glass, sun gazing down on Jeff Bezos' bald head, and the people, for example, Bernie Sanders supporters, people that support democratic socialism, say, well, you have so much money, and yet your factory workers are not being treated correctly. And perhaps they're not. Of course, they're not obligated to work for him. They can get jobs elsewhere. And that's why we have this thing called the free market. You want to use meritocracy and capitalism to, go where the money is, go where the good stuff is. And, not, kind of vote with your wallet, of course. Vote with your wallet versus any sort of, strict moral code. But it's not the rich versus the poor. Dumb idea. Not the rich versus the poor. The rich, of course, if you think of Amazon and you think of Walmart, yes, they have closed down a number of mom and pop stores, of smaller, entrepreneurs and things. There's certainly that harm there. It's not good morally for these larger corporations to exist if they're going to crush out the small people, the smaller businesses, the small business owners. But, of course, buying in bulk lowers the cost. And you can go a couple different ways with economics. You can try to lower the costs of things so that people can afford them, or you can raise taxes, take money from people, and then sort of redistribute it, redistribution of wealth. That is a central part of socialism and these systems. So the rich versus the poor, of course, if you're into Marxism, you know that, the class is the difference. And that's a more productive frame and a less otherist or racist or sexist frame than some of the cultural or social Marxism we're seeing in the collectivist world. But it's still not a perfect frame. It's not a race war. Like I said, race is a filter that's often misused to call people bigots or call people things that they really aren't. Apply negative associations. Check out my video, Negative Association Game, here on BitChute and YouTube. They apply negative associations to people, and sometimes it's through race. I did ask that question in the thought experiment earlier. But race is a filter, because if I say something, if you say I'm saying this thing because I'm white or black or Latino or Native American, whatever my skin tone or ethnic heritage might be, if you're saying that I'm saying this because I'm this race, this ethnicity, now it may be true. It may be true. It's context dependent. Context counts, kids. Context counts. But it may be that I'm defending that race from racism, and I might be looking at it through that filter. But by default, if we're talking about why people are doing bad things, negative things, I don't say, well, that person did it because they're black. That person did it because they're white. That person did this because they're a man, they're a woman, they're trans, they're gay, they're straight. They did it because they're religious. Now, of course, religion is a mutable characteristic, unlike race and sex. And to a large extent, gender, those are immutable characteristics. We have religion, which is mutable. You can change your religion. You can always change. I grew up in a Christian household, and I'm agnostic. It's just a matter of, I could go into Islam if I wanted to. I could convert to Judaism. These are things that I can change. But I can't change the fact that I have a white skin tone, my melanin content is a certain level, and I come off as rather pasty at times. So that's something we can't change. Calling it a race war. It's not a race war. It's about getting smart. Understanding that we should be judged by the content of our character and not our immutable characteristics. We should be judged by our merits and our flaws, just looked at overall, what we brought to the table. And that way we can have a bit more of a humanistic environment for society. Like I said, it's not a battle of the sexes. This may be a dumb idea, but it's not a battle of the sexes. You see, the sexes complement each other. Most of my viewers know that. You know that. I know that. We complement each other because without the complement of male and female and everything in between on that spectrum of sexuality, well, we wouldn't have the human race. And there is a balance there. There is a push and a pull between the sexes. So there's a bit of a battle, if you will. But it basically, in this tug of war, what happens in between is highly productive, highly positive. The friction creates a fire in our bellies that promotes our continued survival and existence. So we often like to make it a battle of the sexes. It's fun to say, well, men this and women that, and trans this and gender that. But really, we should be judged by our character and what we do, and not by our preferences, especially if they're largely manifested in private. What you do behind closed doors is your business. That's negative liberty. Negative liberty. You have the right to be left alone in a free country, like the United States of America. And I don't think that anything that you're doing behind closed doors, as long as it isn't breaking consent or doing something that is all but objectively immoral, that's, illegal in a way that harms people that don't wish to be harmed, actively harms them, I think that you should be able to do it. And of course, that's sort of a libertarian point of view. If you have any thoughts on that, leave me a comment below. We can talk more about what should and shouldn't be allowed, but I don't want to be the authority. Just as I was talking earlier about free speech, if I start to define what free speech is and what you shouldn't be able to do in your private time, that puts me into an authoritarian position, and that's not where I want to be. That's not the kind of channel we have here. It's not about talent, privilege, merit, character, or moral virtue. Now, while I did say, in a more general sense, that we should be judging people based on their character, well, it is about getting smart. It is about understanding if we don't have the talent, if we haven't been granted the privilege, if we haven't had so much merit, but we can recognize that, we can get smart and recognize where we've failed, where we've succeeded, which tracks we have available to move forward. Sometimes, my friend Mark Schneider, Sub Schneider on Twitter, check him out. He talks about Generation 3 and Generation 4 nuclear as a great solution to climate change, no matter what you may believe about climate change. I sometimes call it the modern religion of global warming. And I have a video out there. Global Warming is a Modern Religion, featuring Bernie Sanders. Check that out for more of my perspective on the climate change issue and our solutions for it. But he was talking about how we have, people talk about luck a lot. But people also have this thing called probability, which goes into luck. The perception might be that it's luck, but it's really just really good probability that's been played correctly. Someone got smart. It's not a dumb idea to get smart. It's a smart idea. They looked at a situation, opened up as many avenues forward as they could for success. They opened up, 5 avenues, 10 avenues. And then when one didn't work, and number 2 didn't work, and 3 and 4, the 5th avenue happened to work, and they upped their probability of success. You always want to have an out. That's one of the wisest things you can think about. You always want to have another path to go down in case the ones you're on don't work. Or if you're not inspired, if you're an artist, it's good to be multidisciplinary so that when you're not inspired in one artistic area, you can check out another one and see if you can push the ball forward there and get that dopamine and serotonin going from creative expression. But it's not about merit, character, or moral virtue, because moral virtue is largely subjective. Morality is, in many ways, relative and subjective. There are some hard moral truths that we like to follow as human beings. Stealing is wrong, killing is wrong, raping is wrong, and so forth. There are some things we just have universally decided upon as, not the most moral things. Of course, we also have the non-aggression principle. You stand your ground and you can defend yourself, but you can't, if you're going to follow the NAP. You can't be the aggressor unless it's warranted in some respect. And again, that can also be seen as a not so objective decision. It's not genetics. People get mad when you talk about genetics. And the fact is that I do believe in the world of smarts, in the world of popularity and success as a human being, there are two, among many others, but two major privileges. And those are attractiveness, like optics, good optics, and smarts. And if you have both of those, well, you have a major privilege, a major advantage against other people. Because those people out there in the world, they may have one of those, they may have neither, they may have both. But it's if you look good, if you have, and you don't have to be, you don't have to be a supermodel, you don't have to be a Hollywood actor and look beautiful. But if you can present yourself, if you can use the tools that you have, if you can use the things you've been given by perhaps God or Allah or Buddha, whoever you want to say gave you those immutable privileges of, attraction and a good brain that can process things and, be aware and view situations and navigate through difficult circumstances, those are the major privileges. That's not a dumb idea, that's the truth. Now, some people squander these things. Some people will go out there with their good looks and they think, well, sure, it's easy to find a mate, but I'm not very smart about this. Some people are born into, people talk about wealth as privilege, and it's a massive privilege. It is. It's a big head start on life. Think about President Trump. You have to admit, when he got that $1 million from his father he inherited, as well as some of the business, that gives you a big advantage. But of course, if President Trump were just like, certain people, and he squandered it, he spent the money and the things that he got from his dad and his family on like sports cars, and he just did it, got a bunch of dope money, got a bunch of cocaine and just did drugs, and ended up like Robert Downey Jr. before he figured it all out and got away from the drugs. Just because you have the privilege of money doesn't mean you're necessarily going to make it. Because you got to have smarts. You got to have those smarts in your head. And attractiveness does not hurt. And genetics do deliver those things. If you have certain kind of... And again, yes, beauty is largely subjective. Beauty is largely subjective. We have to admit that. But in general, I always make this analogy, and this may trigger and bother some people. But say if you have two men come in to do a job. They come in to be employed. There's a hiring going on, and there are two men that walk into that job. And one of them, they're both, in all ways, in terms of merit, they're both equal. They're both equal. But one of them is not very attractive, has body odor, and isn't terribly friendly. They do the job really well, but the appearance is someone that's negative or doesn't have good optics. Okay? The other one, it looks good, is friendly, wears a nice suit. This one comes in, they both do the same job. They both do it equally well in the case of this analogy or this example. But they're not on the same level in terms of appearance, in terms of optics. And that requires smarts to know, like, oh, I know what they're looking for. We know what they're looking for. They might have the same amount of merit in terms of the job performance. But people don't go by the facts. People aren't often persuaded just by the facts. They require the optics to match up too. So when we talk about politics as a post-truth realm, oftentimes it's the optics of a situation that guides people's decision-making process. So if they're hiring and they see two guys, all things being equal, they're going to more likely hire the guy that has his shit together. It looks good. It seems to respect the job, even though they're both doing the same level of productivity. The one that respects the job will, be more likely to get it. So it's not genetics, genetic lottery, they call it. Genetics are important because they say that your politics as a human being is like 50% genetic and the rest is nurture. But it's not genetics. It's about getting smart. You don't have to be born smart to get smart. There are plenty of people out here in the world that might not pass every test. They might not go through all these filters and succeed in the same way because we all think differently. We have 7 billion different perspectives and different ways of processing information. And there's no one objective way to gauge intelligence in our reality. There's no one way. We all have our own brand of smarts, and we all complement each other in different ways. But that's really what it is. It's about recognizing your limitations and working within them. It's not a dumb idea. It's about getting smart, no matter how stupid we are. We might be stupid, but if we can recognize that, well, we can work within those parameters. And I try to do that every day. So, onward and upward. I think it's time for today's sponsor. Diet Orange Crush. It's refreshing, delicious, and you don't have to be an orange man or an orange woman to enjoy the fine flavor that is Diet Orange Crush. Get crushed. I did this one tweet here in the Oprah voice. And you get an accusation of racism. And you get an accusation of racism. And you get an accusation of sexism. And you get an accusation of racism. Hashtag Democrats. Sorry, guys. If you use these filters and you're always talking about otherism, well, that means that we have a right to point it out and make fun of it and make the satire that I know the viewers of this channel have come here to see. And it's fun. I had put up a video, how to create a cult in 2 easy steps. Check it out on my channel. And remember, there's a difference between cults and culture. And if you have any thoughts on what that difference may be, leave me a comment below. I'm looking forward to the new Ghostbusters movie. That first trailer was rather fun. Kind of a, as everyone has already sort of said this, a Stranger Things vibe. Because it also has Finn Wolfhard in there. And it seems like they're trying to capitalize on the success of that television program. And speaking of television programs, I'd like to give a shout out to my man, Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard, Admiral, Captain, as he demoted himself. The new show, Star Trek Picard, is pretty cool, actually. I have a pretty high standard. I'm not the target audience for the more woke Star Trek of Discovery. This sort of, when you view it and you see all the specific triggers for people that are supposed to be fitting within that macro simulation of the social justice modern religion, and you're supposed to go by the narrative and what's funny and what the associations are supposed to be. Picard doesn't really do that. It's been very respectful to the lore as well. No pun intended. for Star Trek The Next Generation fans. It's been very, very respectful to the lore of the series, right up through Star Trek Nemesis, the final Next Generation movie. It just concludes like, it follows, it continues the story in a way that I find actually rather appealing. Now, I will say this, in my opinion, it's not quite as good at capturing Star Trek as The Mandalorian, which is amazing, is at capturing Star Wars. Mandalorian is legitimately the best Star Wars film / TV show since, in my opinion, Return of the Jedi. But Star Trek Picard, the acting is great, the villains are convincing, the writing is pretty tight. You know, it's not your parents' Star Trek. It's not The Next Generation. It's not Deep Space Nine. It's not the original series or Voyager or Enterprise. It's not Discovery. It's a different kind of show. But what they're doing, the action, I don't want to give too many spoilers away for it. But if you're a Star Trek fan, if you're interested in sci-fi, definitely give it a chance, because I think they're doing a good thing with this. Excuse me. And obviously watch The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. It's just fantastic, and it goes in the opposite direction of the newer feature films, like The Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi. It goes in a different structural direction. Whereas those films, notably The Rise of Skywalker, tried to fit in as much information, as many associations as possible. The Mandalorian keeps it concise. It's very visual, very simplified. Keep it simple, stupid storytelling. So I do believe The Mandalorian is one to watch, and certainly Picard as well. So check it out. A lot of tweets here, but most of them are too contextual for broadcast today in 2020. They're more about things that happened then that, out of context, are less timeless. A. Reality has two sides. B. Reality has more than two sides. Choose wisely. That's a tweet that I did. What do you think? Does reality have two sides or more? Leave a comment below. Oh my goodness. Speaking of The Last Jedi, I have a meme here from it. Some good memes from that film. A couple thought experiments. You can certainly go onto Twitter and search out my tweets by putting in Real Jeff Tidwell on Twitter into the search bar with some of the terms from these videos, including the named tweet titles, so you can get a closer look at those, and you can let me know what you think. Moments like this would be a good opportunity to try out the 2x speed button and get past the portions where I'm looking for tweets, or you could check out my other videos, my segments that have all the information without the dead air, and those are available on BitChute and YouTube over time. So we're going to move on into May 2019. I appreciate your patience. So we did have some interesting news in the past few days. The UK has left the EU. That's the United Kingdom has left the European Union in something called Brexit. You might have heard of it. It's been a long process. 4 years have passed since the initial Brexit vote that actually came before the 2016 US presidential election. And sort of, in a sense, kind of predicted it. The sentiment being populism, nationalism, trying to have individual sovereignty. And then, of course, we elected in the United States Donald Trump, who had preached a message, who had delivered a message of America first, sort of focusing on us before focusing on other countries. Not forgetting the global picture, of course, but certainly putting American interests first and trying to make sure things are okay at home, as Jordan Peterson would say, before concerning ourselves with the affairs of the rest of the world. Now, it is a glacial process for us to end our interventionism and things, but I do believe that the Trump administration, this is a Trump positive channel. We look at both sides and we decide based on a number of factors what is good or is not. And you can, of course, if you disagree or agree, please leave a comment below. But I believe that the Trump administration has directionally moved us in a positive direction when it comes to foreign policy. So hopefully we can get out of Iraq, we can get out of our conflict with Iran, we can find a sense of world peace and maybe stop killing so many Yemenis as well. There's a number of things that the United States has been doing since back in the Obama administration, and even further back from there, that we continue, that I find to be rather anti-human, and the Trump administration has continued these practices. But of course, these are complex situations that, you know, we only have a limited window into. We have to choose which propaganda we'd like to follow and who we'd like to believe and who's telling the truth and who's using hyperbole or who's lying using whatever structure they are. It's politics, folks, and geopolitics, a post-truth realm. So, the struggle continues. Tweets. Many tweets. Hate speech is subjective and therefore as real as any given fantasy. We already talked about that today. And of course, the modern religion of censorship. And when you're questioning a modern religion such as censorship, it is important to consider its axiom: what is your God going to be? How can universal truth and moral virtue be achieved in a secular world? God would do it top down. Authority, absolution, salvation, silence. In the case of the modern religion of censorship, it's just silence that you're looking for. Hearing a dissenting view, well, that might bounce up against your cognitive dissonance muscles and might trigger your confirmation bias to protect itself, to go into a survivalistic state where you've heard the same messages again and again and again. We have heard them. I've heard them. We've all gone through this. This isn't any one person. This is all of us. Repetition, my friends. We hear the same messages again and again and again, and they become the truth. And then the more ingrained they are, the more they've traveled through our neural pathways, the harder it is for us to accept new ideas. Instead, we get cognitive dissonance. We think in the back of our head sometimes, we all do this. We say, is that true? Nah, can't be true. I'm going to bounce that idea off because it may be too uncomfortable. Maybe it conflicts with my confirmation of what the truth is, my bias towards what has already been established. And I don't know what to do except for to walk the other direction. It's too uncomfortable. Cognitive dissonance is a protective mechanism, as I've talked about in other videos, but it can be destructive to our epistemological journey, because sometimes we look at situations and say, well, this is contradictory. The reality is that contradictions don't really exist. It's really usually more missing information. Now, some people are truly being irrational and illogical at a given point in time, because we are all irrational beings trying to make sense of this world using things like ethics and morals and all these systems to find a moral code that we can hold on to, a bar, and have order in our lives, purpose, meaning. It's not just a postmodern, post-truth world of Dadaism. We have to have something to look to for support, for stability, a rock in a violent ocean of uncertainty. We have to have something. So we turn to modern religion, we turn to traditional religion, but we turn to things like censorship to say, well, we should be removing all the voices that are not credible, and then of course credibility is in many ways subjective. Like if someone's deliberately leading people down a road of destruction and disinformation, which the difference between misinformation and disinformation is that disinformation requires intent, but of course reading intent is mind reading. Only the person's, what they're communicating, only the person communicating can actually give you an idea, and then you have to read their face and read their expressions and understand their words. And frankly, and that's why, with censorship, you're not really being reasonable. You're using something I would call more of a faith, thus putting faith over reason, and thus being a disciple of a modern religion. God would do it top down. He would arbitrarily remove the voices that he doesn't like. That would be censorship. Silence. Okay. So we're going to do 2 more tweets for you today. Maybe more, but we'll start with 2 and see where that gets us. A lot of tweets here, but not too many that I want to talk about today. Shameless propaganda. Oh my. Well, let me talk about something different for once. We don't talk about gaming very often on this channel. I do have a couple of videos out, for example, Gamer Speak, talking about new boots and fight. If you want your opponents to be a bit more aggressive, you got to put a little fight into them. Check out that video on BitChute and YouTube. But I want to talk about this for a moment because you're pretty deep in the video. You're past the 1 hour mark to my 1 hour and 5 minute crowd. Thank you for getting this far and watching. And so this is a message for Nintendo. Number 1, Nintendo, localize Mother 3, also known as Earthbound 2, and remake it with claymation graphics a la Kirby and the Rainbow Curse. Number 2, allow players to toggle between the original 16-bit presentation and the new one with a button press, or do it through the menu. And number 3, profit. That is probably because it's Earthbound. So, yeah, this is a good opportunity to talk about one of my favorite video game franchises. It's called Earthbound. Check it out. It's an RPG, turn-based 16-bit RPG for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And it's rather cool because it's very weird. It's got a lot of personality. It's got great writing, a lot of references to pulp culture, and frankly, a very engaging, emotional story as well. Good combat system, large world that's largely open as well, as most RPGs of that time shared. But Mother 2 in Japan. Earthbound for the Super Nintendo is called Mother 2. There was a sequel released for the Game Boy Advance in 2006 called Mother 3. And to date, it hasn't come to the United States. It's only been Mother 3 in Japan. Now, almost immediately, there were ROM hacks out there. You can use an emulator, a program for your PC that allows you, for those that don't know, to play games on their computer, Nintendo, Genesis, whatever it might be. Literally every console has been emulated on some level. The newer consoles, of course, require much more processing power, so they don't have the same level of quality just yet and compatibility, but Mother 3 was immediately translated to English by a team, and a ROM hack was released, and it was really cool, and many people played the game that way. But I'm saying, now that we have the Nintendo Switch, and we have games like the new Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening remake/remaster that uses this sort of like, it's not painterly, but it's like a little diorama approach, little figurine, realistic looking figurines in the graphics. That's the style that it uses. I was thinking Mother 3 or Earthbound 2 with claymation graphics would be fantastic, because it would just look so good on the Switch screen. And of course, you want to include a toggle button, just a button. One button will toggle you between 16-bit Super Nintendo Game Boy Advance graphics and the new high-definition claymation graphics that like pop out of the screen almost. I think that would be a great idea. And of course, profit, but Earthbound has always been a bit of a niche series for Nintendo. Ness and Lucas from the series have appeared in Super Smash Bros. Games going all the way back to the 90s, but it hasn't really been the most successful series, so I don't have high hopes for this, but I figured I'd mention it. Hey YouTube, BitChute, get on board. We want to get a new Mother 3 translation from Nintendo directly with brand new graphics, and I think it will sell, because everything seems to sell on the Switch. So I was talking to my branding person. You might think I do all my own branding. I say on my Twitter, I say, create your own label, create your own brand, right? But I have a branding person. And they suggested that I won't trend unless I say more knee-jerk, factless, brain-dead things. You know, it's like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. The sun casts its shining eye through parting cloud. I feel the rays of the sun hitting my face. Okay, I'm ready. Who can I call a racist today? It's kind of what it seems to be becoming on Twitter. You have people talking about white male rage. Can you imagine if they talked about another race that way? Oh, black male rage. Ooh. Native American male rage. Indian, Chinese. It would be xenophobia. Xenophobia is a sin. Remember, can't talk about the Chinese. Notably during this coronavirus crisis, you just can't talk any jokes about the 1.4 billion people in China, but China isn't a race, of course. We're not talking about that. Xenophobia is the fear of Chinese people, Chinese goods, Chinese culture, and so forth. And it is not a good thing. You're not judging people by their character or their merit or their flaws when you're talking about xenophobia. That's an otherist belief, that phobia. But people are talking about these things, white male rage, black this. There's all this going on. People saying, you're a racist, you're a racist. Race is a filter. It's just a filter. If someone's saying something specifically racist, they're using race to judge people. Specifically. Like unquestionably, explicitly. Yes, that is racism. It doesn't matter what color you are. If you're white and saying racist things about white people, still racist. If you're black, saying racist things about black people, you're still racist. Or you're being racist. You know, you don't have to wear the badge, wear the association forever, but certainly it's something to look at and perhaps consider changing about yourself, because we should be judging people by their character, the contents of their character, what they brought to the table, not the color that they were when they came into this world. But, of course, I won't trend with these thoughts. These are either controversial or they're not important thoughts. But if someone comes out and says something brain dead or stupid, yes, I'm being pretentious. Deal with it. If someone says something brain dead or stupid, maybe a one-liner. I found most of my tweets that are one line happen to be more popular. You know, I know that, you know, we only have so much time in the day. We have so much attention. We are in a world where, you know, the first 3 lines of a tweet really decide whether the person's going to read the rest. And if you need to get to the end, there's this entire system of, sometimes people hide a beautiful satirical joke at the end of a tweet. But largely, most of the tweets I see that get hundreds of thousands of likes and retweets are very, very simple and often, going to be judgmental for a moment here, not very deep, and often perhaps even destructive. But it's all subjective. We don't have to get into pointing to specifics. I just think that, you know, sometimes I do feel like some of my more rote, not mindless, but rote commentary gets the most attention. And I guess that might be a product of the culture we've created and cultivated, as it were, on Twitter and social media at large. But who am I to say? You can leave me a comment below with your thoughts on how I've presented this information. So, my branding person is mad at me already. Okay, so now that we have gotten through about 10 or 15 minutes of lighter content, lighter fare, we're going to go into something a little heavier and do 2 more tweets for you. The first one being right here, a named tweet, and it's called Questionable Authority. Questionable Authority. Institutions are a modern religion. Media groups generate their own axioms for determining the truth. YouTube, for example, we have to ask the question of YouTube, why is this considered an authoritative source when other credible outlets aren't? And then they say, YouTube would respond, because it's the New York Times. The translation being, why did we do this? Why did we deplatform this person and demonetize this person when letting these people over here stay? Because God. They're institutional figures. They have blessings from the popes and prophets of the modern religion of institutions, academia, media, and state. They have the credentials. They have the title of expert, or whatever sophistry you'd like to use to get people, pass them through sophistry school, graduate, and learn how to be an authority for everyone to appeal to. So This tweet here, the way it's worded, it's a very visual tweet, but I'll walk you through it. So if we put too much faith over reason when discussing institutionals, media figures, institutional figures, presidents, governments, senators, congresspeople, just anybody in a state of power that has an institutional force backing them. If we put too much faith in these people and believe everything they say, well, it's the same thing as if we turn to a traditional deity like God. Look up and say, well, I'm doing this because God. I believe that the New York Times is more credible because God. The reality is that a lot of these major institutional media sources have proven themselves over time to have just as many flaws as your average quote-unquote conspiracy theory site. And in fact, I'll go even one step further. I'll talk about how even satire sites are in the crosshairs of these institutions because they're too close to the reality of the fake news. People don't know the difference between fake news from the institutions and fake news from a satire site like The Onion or the Babylon Bee. So they're being attacked for misinformation and disinformation when they're clearly marked satire. If that doesn't give us all an indication of where the state of epistemology is right now in 2020, United States, well, I don't know what does. So media groups generate their own axioms for determining the truth. They say it's an authoritative source. It's a trusted source. And of course, these are all persuasion words. They're all persuasion words. You can trust it. Why can you trust it? Well, it's the New York Times. How long have they been around? Well, 100 years, 200 years, so they're trusted. But the fact is that institutions are people. And as people are irrational, well, we can be corrupted. And we can actually do things that, well, really only pertain to our self-interest in a way that, well, I think we can all relate to. We can all see that sometimes people don't want to say this or they'll say this a certain way. And they'll do it because it helps them. It brings them more success. And the institutions have to keep this narrative going. It's all working. The media macro simulation, as I sometimes call it, is you have to have a set narrative. Otherwise, everyone's contradicting each other. If you watch Saturday Night Live, you'll actually see it happening in real time. The writers have talking points memos, most likely. That's the way it looks, where they all have to make sure they're following the same narrative as it pertains to media figures. For example, if you look at their Democratic debate sketch at the beginning of one of the more recent episodes, and they had all the candidates, Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar, cringe Tom Steyer, no Michael Bloomberg. Actually, no. Fred Armisen played Michael Bloomberg, who is in the next debate, I believe, because the DNC let him in. All you got to do is put up, what, 30, 40, 50 million dollars, and you can be a Democratic candidate. Try it today. Do it like Mike Bloomberg. They had Andrew Yang, but everyone kind of followed it, fell into exactly where they belong in the narrative. And of course, immediately the figures that are less popular with the establishment media, the institutional media, under the modern religion of institutions, people like Bernie Sanders, the first thing they say is, he had a heart attack. Heart attack. There's a heart attack. Then you have Tulsi Gabbard. I voted present for impeachment, which is now, as Scott Adams so aptly put, unpeachment, because the senators voted not to hear any witnesses in the Senate impeachment trial of Orange Man, President Trump. But they'll use those specific associations and callbacks that people recognize. Because if you're following the media macro simulation around these figures, oh, Pete Buttigieg isn't doing so well with African Americans or really black people. They'll say these things. They'll fall into there's a sort of established, this is the way things are. This is who that person is. Oh, Here's Bernie Sanders, he's a curmudgeonly old man. Here's Tulsi Gabbard, she's cold, and she always says things in the same voice, very coldly and clinically. She'll say, regime change wars and counter-interventionism and our brothers and sisters in arms. And to be fair, there is a bit of satire and humor to be farmed from people like Tulsi Gabbard. But they all follow the same script. From Kimmel to Stephen Colbert. Even Stephen Colbert even uses almost exactly the Donald Trump impression that Alec Baldwin uses on SNL. So there's this sort of continuity between all these different media figures. They're all going by the same general script, because otherwise they'd be contradicting each other, and people can't have that. They need to know exactly what the situation is with their cultural figures, according to their system. So, talking truth, and of course modern religions are a search for order, purpose, universal truth, and moral virtue, among other things. I've talked about this at length, including my brand new video, Modern Religions for Postmodern Prophets. Check that out on BitChute and YouTube. It's very good. It'll talk a little bit about this issue and give you an overview of why I use this postmodern framing called modern religion. It's rather helpful. So YouTube, why is this considered an authoritative source when other credible outlets aren't? Why do you have to bring up a Wikipedia, talking non-credible here, Wikipedia article at the bottom of every video when they're talking about a topic? Like, you have to direct them back to the accepted, established narrative. Otherwise, people will be believing all different stuff. The truth will lie between. There'll be two sides to every equation. And I don't think that really works in the best interests, the self-interest of these institutions that are trying to persuade people and culturally engineer people to where they want them to go. That's why Google itself, we have to ask the question of Google, who owns YouTube, why, when Project Veritas came out and talked about the algorithms that they were manipulating and the systems they were using to direct people around, why are you doing this? What's the goal? And they say, well, we support the Democrats. We support Elizabeth Warren. We don't want there to be wrong-think. We want right-think only. And that's the narrow little window of acceptable dialogue that we want. And everything outside of that, that's all hate. That's extremism. Got to stick to the script. That's the institutional world when it comes to this stuff. They say it's an authoritative source because it's the New York Times, it's the Washington Post, it's Fox News, it's CNN, it's whatever you want to call it, whatever source you consider to be so big and influential and institutional, that, well, put aside reason, bring in the faith and just say, it's the Washington Times, I can trust it. It's the New York Post. You know, all the other papers are anti-Trump. This one is the only one that's borderline tabloidy. But hey, you know, it goes with my confirmation bias, and I just stick with it. Got to question everything, folks. Question authority. That's why this tweet is called Questionable Authority. We must always be vigilant on this journey to getting all of the information. So that was that. And we have one more tweet for you today. Thank you for sticking around, my 1 hour and 25-minute crowd. Donald Trump is a traitor for being open to information from foreign sources. The Trump-Russia investigation was justified by the UK's Steele dossier. Pick one! Pick one! You can't say that he was a traitor for being open to information from foreign sources and then have the Russiagate hoax conspiracy theory predicated on foreign sources delivering essentially an elaborate hit piece smear job on the president that was largely proven to be false. You've got to pick one of those two. Can't have both. And speaking of Trump, we'll finish with this one today. A little system that I see quite often. There's something called the trending typo trick. And this talks a little bit about that. Number 1, say a provocative thing. Draw negative press. Number 2, make a blatant typo in a tweet and trend. Number 3, rinse and repeat. Now, tell me, what was in the news 2 weeks ago? Leave me a comment below with what was in the news 2 weeks ago, if you remember. And that's the point, that our media cycles are so fast, we're getting so much information, and our attention is so now limited through we no longer have to wait around. We have instant gratification culture. We don't have the deferral of these things as much. We don't have deferred gratification, delayed gratification as a virtue. We now have to keep up with the news. We can't get off the internet for even a week sometimes without missing a swath of stories that are important to us, or not important, but we may judge them to be important to us because they might be part of the culture. You might need to catch up. But Trump will say a provocative thing, and he'll draw the ire and attention of the news. They'll come out and use Cunningham's law and tell him everywhere that he was wrong. And sometimes, because he's cognizant of this, now I'm not mind reading or projecting, but it seems pretty obvious at this point. Most people will agree. And this is not just Trump that does this, but a number of people will say the wrong thing intentionally. I've done it. Say the wrong thing intentionally. Cunningham's law. The best way to get to the answer is to say the wrong one. Say the wrong answer, and people will jump at the opportunity to prove to you that they have the right one. And people will come out of the woodwork and say, no, you're wrong. You are wrong. And they'll come out with you with the right answer, and that way you kind of don't have to be right all the time. You can just make sure you're monitoring what people are saying and the feedback they're giving you, and all of a sudden you're on the right path again. And President Trump has done this. He publicly A/B tests quite a bit. Again, I can only speculate based on the observations that I'm making. I'm not mind reading or projecting the president. But he says provocative things and draws negative press. And it trends and things happen. And more, whatever he put that provocation on, whatever he, spun a certain way to make it more sticky, for people, to be persuaded to interact with it. Whatever he did, it's probably something he wants you to see. He's a king of publicity. He knows he might be the most publicized human being in history by far, perhaps never to be ever beaten in that category. He's a very, very public person. We know more about Trump than we know about most media figures. So the other thing he does is what I call the trending typo trick. Make a blatant typo in a tweet and trend. Now, I'm not saying that every Trump typo or every typo that people make is by any means intentional. Again, we can't read minds. But sometimes you see the pattern. It's so blatantly obvious. The characters weren't near each other on the keyboard or on the typing device, whatever you're using. There's no chance that it could have been an accident. It is a deliberate typo. And those typos trend. Trending typo trick. Trending typo trick. They trend, and people see whatever underlying content there was with that story. So say, for example, something important happens with the military, or something happens very important with healthcare. Anything that Trump or any individual using the trending typo trick wants you to see is its signal is amplified by the typo, because people are making fun of it, and inadvertently perhaps, or they understand the nature of publicity and persuasion, they are amplifying that signal, and they're spreading around something that some people will just look at the joke, the typo, and go, the President of the United States is a dumb idiot. He's evil and he's dumb. Ha ha ha. That's a typo. They might do that. And they might be right. Might just be a honest typo, or it could be a TTT, trending typo trick. And that way, you get that information out, you get that messaging out in a more effective manner. And of course, rinse and repeat. This happens again and again and again. Media cycles, they go from who knows how long they are now, 24 hours, 12 hours, 3 days. But essentially every 2 weeks, I've been saying for a month now, World War III was a month ago. Did you know that? Right now it's February 1st, 2020. World War III was a month ago. Did you know that? Because frankly, you wouldn't know, because we had a little bit of a conflict with Iran that's still ongoing, but we killed Soleimani and things happened with the U.S. Embassy, and we're still waiting for results on the Middle East peace plan. There's a brand new idea for Middle East peace involving Israel and Palestine, and I have taken a white pill approach on this. I'm not saying it's going to work out. I'm not saying it's a good plan or a bad plan, but I'm saying that it's a plan. It's something to think about, to put on the table, a big ask, if you will, that can be used. But the thing is, though, I couldn't tell you what was in the news 2 weeks ago. It's one of the reasons I make these tweet videos very time travel-y. They're time travel. I go back 9, 10 months and talk about stuff that happened 10 months ago so you remember it. Otherwise, it's all just memory being an illusion. We only remember things based on the emotions we felt or the image, or there's a lot of different things that cloud what the true memory was. So I like to bring people back up to speed. But again, things are moving so fast that we can't take too much time on something that happened 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. We've got to stay up with what's happening right now. And that's challenging. And we just don't have the mental space sometimes to balance it all. So it's good to have a reminder of just how cyclical this all is. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching and being patient as I looked for tweets earlier in the video. I do appreciate everything that I get from this channel. It's for me, but it's also for you, the viewer, and I appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed the content today, please hit like and subscribe. Share the videos around. If you really enjoyed it, tap the little bell for notifications. As always, I can be found on Twitter at RealJeffTidwell. I'm also on Gab, Minds, Telegram, Parler, and Instagram. If you're not watching this video on YouTube, you're watching it on BitChute. BitChute is a great alternative media site. At this point, it's the main alternative to YouTube, and there are some users on there that have 70,000 or more subscribers. And so I do consider BitChute to be a very important part of my channel. And of course, like I say in every video, every tweet video, I always say, everything I said today might be wrong. Or everything I said today might be right. But perhaps the truth lies between both sides. Some of what I said was right, and some of what I said was wrong. I think that makes the most sense. So again, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.